Hi, my name's Arsu. I'm with the Humanitarian and Fragile Context branch at UNFPA, headquarters in New York. Now, I'm here to talk to you about the emergency funds. So we've left an emergency, and now we're going to talk to you about how to access funds if your country offices are responding to emergency funds as a first allocation for offices as a seed funding mechanism. We'll talk about how to access those funds, the eligibility criteria to get those funds, and what happens after you actually receive the allocation. What are the emergency funds? The emergency funds are exactly what the name implies. They're an internal UNFPA funding mechanism to be distributed for countries or any field office responding to a humanitarian crisis, and also for preparedness. Now, how did they come about? The executive board several years ago established the emergency funding mechanism with $3 million of core funding. With that allocation, the core funding for emergency funds went from $3 million to $10 million. Now, since 2016, over the last 2 years, due to austerity measures and prioritization of core funding, the emergency funding mechanism has not always been at a total of $10 million. In 2016, core funding was at $5 million allocated to the emergency funding mechanism. In 2017, was $6 million in core funding. Now in 2017, we also received non-core funding to the emergency fund mechanism. So we started with $6 million in core funding. We added $3 million in non-core funding for a total allocation of $9 million in 2017. The emergency funds take the form of seed funding. What does that mean? That means it is funding for the kickstart your interventions in an emergency. So it allows UNFPA to be there at the table at the onset of the emergency. It is not meant for you to use it for the entire emergency response, but again, as seed funding to get you started. The other thing you should know about it is the emergency funds are a grant mechanism. You don't have to pay it back. What makes you eligible to receive emergency funding? Like the name implies, accessing the emergency funds should be for emergency-related program, humanitarian-related interventions. Now, what does that mean? That means you should be responding to, it could be a conflict-related issue, could be a natural disaster, epidemics, preparedness-related, because that falls out as well under humanitarian interventions. You should reference your minimum preparedness actions MPA guidance note as well. Now, next question is there a limit to how much you can ask for from the emergency funds? There's no limit. There's no limit to what you can ask for in the emergency funds. Of course, we ask you to consider what your actual needs are when you're accessing these emergency funds. So you should make your request according to what the needs are on the ground and focus on short-term life-saving criteria, because as I mentioned earlier, the emergency funds are seed funding. They're there to help you get started, but we are expected to mobilize resources from other areas to help you continue the longer-term aspect of the response. Now, for your reference, the average size of an emergency fund request over the past 2 years has been $150,000, give or take. Now, under the special situation of an L3, a level 3 emergency is declared either by the UN system or by UNFPA internally. You are automatically entitled to $250,000.
My God, we've just had a flood in the bathroom. It's an internal L3. What are we going to do?
Here's an exact example of what I was talking about. So, you would be allocated $250,000 from the emergency fund to address our response to this L3.
Call the plumber!
If you require any more details on eligibility, please visit the PPM website and the My UNFPA intranet. And to do that, you would visit the My UNFPA Policies and Procedures Manual online, find the Program section, and click on Humanitarian Programming, and you'll be brought to the Humanitarian Programming section where the policy will be available for you to view. So now, I bet you want to know how to get these funds. Well, we follow a process when you're applying for these funds. To access the funds, you would first visit the My UNFPA intranet site and log into the emergency funding application to start submitting your request. Where to find that link? You can go to your My UNFPA index section E for emergency fund request and click on the link. You click on this link, you will be brought to this page to submit your application. Here's a process diagram for you to understand a bit about how we process your emergency fund request. So as a start, you create your request and you submit it to the regional office. So you create your request on the online system, it's submitted to the regional office. The regional office will conduct a review of that request, again through the system, and once they finish their review of that request, they will provide you feedback through the system again, and you will receive that feedback and update your request in the system. Now, once you update that request, you can resubmit it. It'll come back to the regional office, and once the regional office reviews it again, when they feel that it's ready, they will clear it and it will come to the Humanitarian Fragile Context branch here in New York. Once we receive it, we will review it technically and substantively and provide additional feedback. Again, the feedback will come through the system from us in the Humanitarian branch directly to you, the submitting office. Once you receive that feedback, incorporate it into an updated request again via the online system, you can resubmit it directly to us in the Humanitarian branch. Now, once we receive your updated feedback, incorporated into the emergency fund request, we will review it, and if everything has been duly incorporated, we will endorse it for final approval by the emergency director. In this case, that's the director of program division. So once he approves it, it will go to the core fund or non-core fund allocation team, both housed in DMS. At this time, I'd like to share 2 important points with you. One is, this is an allocation for emergency funding. We recognize that, and we want to make sure that because you're responding to an emergency, time is of the essence. So we commit to you that once the humanitarian branch receives an emergency funding request, we will provide you feedback within 24 to 48 hours. And once you receive that feedback and then you send it back to us, the time will start again, and we will commit again to responding to you within 24 to 48 hours. Now, on the second time around, when you resubmit it to us after the feedback, if everything is in order, you should receive your allocation within 24 to 48 hours. The second point that I wanted to share with you is, you don't always receive exactly the total amount that you may request. In other words, you may request $200,000, but you may only be allocated $150,000.
Now you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need.
Now, why is that? That may be due to a multitude of reasons, such as prioritization of your emergency with other emergencies that the emergency fund may be responding to. Secondly, it depends on the time of the year. Thirdly, it depends on how much money is left in the emergency fund. So depending on the time of the year, how much time is left in the year, and the amount of money left in the emergency fund, these all impact how much we can allocate. Now, if you should not receive your entire allocation as requested, we will provide you feedback with the allocation of exactly which portions were not funded. Now, one final point I want to share with you. Once it's approved in the system by Program Division, you will receive a message via email to your office, to the person who actually submitted the request, that specific person, indicating how much was allocated and a formal notice of approval by Program Division. One other point regarding your emergency fund request that I'd like to draw your attention to is the procurement of reproductive health kits. Now, approximately 50% of our emergency fund requests include procurement and distribution of our reproductive health kits. Now, when an emergency fund request is submitted that includes procurement and distribution of RH kits, we partner with our colleagues in the Commodity Security Branch, CSB, to help us fund those kits. Therefore, if your emergency fund request totals $200,000, and in that total of $200,000, $30,000 is for reproductive health kits, then your allocation from the emergency fund may be $170,000, and the remaining $30,000, which is for the RH kits, would come from Commodity Security Branch. Of course, you will receive an approval and you will be contacted by Commodity Security Branch if they are willing and able to support that funding. But you should definitely include reproductive health kits as part of one item within the overall emergency fund request. Now, once your approval for the emergency fund request is received, in the system, it will also tell you if you include reproductive health kits in this request. After DMS has allocated your funds, it will notify Commodity Security Branch personnel, and they will go in the system and verify that they can support the reproductive health kits portion of the emergency fund request. Once that approval is noted in the system, it will move to Procurement Services Branch. Procurement Services Branch will be notified that the portion of this emergency fund request has included RH kits, which has been approved for funding by Commodity Security Branch. Procurement will then notify you through the system when this procurement item has shipped or partially shipped. Again, you will be doing procurement and distribution of RH kits. Please include the freight charges for those RH kits. That's a very important element. So thanks for being with me today, and I hope you all learned a bit about the emergency funds, how to access them, what's the eligibility criteria to access them, and what happens after you receive your allocation. And with that, it's time for me to get back to work. One more thing.